we have a new kid on the block. The Global Liquidity Bitcoin Basket is a new index series which is available from CrossBorder Capital. Michael Howell is publishing this new data series on crypto-specific Bitcoin. So let's run our cycle analysis. We need to talk.
From the mind of Lars von Tienen, the most advanced cycle analysis, hot off the press.
Yeah, here we are at the foundation for the study of cycles with a new episode of Cycles TV. And as I promised last week, we will have a follow-up in specific on cycles in crypto and Bitcoin. And today I'm proud to have another deep dive in the Bitcoin series with new data available. So we have new data at our hands, which is just great for us as a cycle analyst. So what data we are talking about? So I'm talking about the Global Liquidity Bitcoin Basket, which is a new index series, as mentioned, provided by Michael Howell, who is the expert on global liquidity. And he is adjusting that for Bitcoin. So let's have a specific view. First, I would everyone recommend have a read in Michael's article on Substack Capital Wars, which is linked here in the description. In this article, you will find all the details on that new data series which is available. So he explains everything around that data set, and I will give you just a quick summary about the main points on that. So here's a quick primer what you need to know for this video today. So first, according to Michael Howell's work, a Bitcoin price action is systematically tied to global liquidity and responsible for over 40% of its movement. So global liquidity has 41% correlation to the movements of Bitcoin. That's the first fact we can use based off that. However, and that's now the reason that new basket was introduced, if we just look at the Bitcoin per US dollar as a price, that's quite very narrow. Yeah, just looking at one currency pair, we just value Bitcoin in terms of US dollar. But Bitcoin is a global available asset right now. So the Bitcoin US dollar price is too narrow, as it only reflects the US dollar dynamics and not the whole global currency flows. And that's now what the Global Liquidity Index wants to overcome. The Global Liquidity Bitcoin Basket tracks Bitcoin now as a liquidity weighted basket of 15 major currency. So that's the key point to have in mind here, so that the Bitcoin basket is using 15 major currencies, and those currencies are weighted based on their impact on global liquidity. Yeah, so we get a more broader view on the value of Bitcoin in a global perspective, not just in one currency pair. And for that global perspective, global liquidity and the relation of global liquidity in those countries is reflected to build that basket. Yeah, so that's very interesting. So it's not as narrow; it's more wide now globally valuation measurement. And if we would look into the future, so if Bitcoin matures more and more and the volatility declines, it might become essential because it isolates the effects of single currencies and captures the macro signals that the US dollar-based Bitcoin price cannot reflect on its own. So these are the core main reasons why it's really, really interesting to have a closer look at that data series. What we will do here, and for sure that's why we are here today, is we will run a cycle analysis on that data set now. Okay? So let's jump over to our cycle analyzer tool. And big thanks to Michael Howell, because he allowed us to use his data series to run a cycle analysis on that. So thank you for providing us that data information. The data is, we did this analysis in by end of July. So let me now bring you into the screen. So here to the right, you see the global liquidity Bitcoin basket now as a data series. So this is not the Bitcoin price. Always be sure, this is now the Bitcoin basket. So I'm taking the full series here. So we will start with a long-term analysis over the whole data set now to identify and isolate the most important and dominant cycles here. So looking at this spectrum at the bottom here of that chart, so here we can identify 3 major cycles, and those cycles are measured in trading days, because weekends are currently not part of that analysis. So it's the trading day cycles lengths we are seeing here. So let's now have a look at each cycle on its own. Let's start with the 140 days trading day cycle here. Let's activate it. So this cycle seems to have topped now in summer this year, while March and April, the upswing leg seems to have come to an end. And this cycle is now turning into the next downswing phase for that specific cycle. So that's the 140. Let's use the 164 trading days, which is another cycle which is currently arriving at its top. So which gives us early August as a topping date. So we are today for sure beginning of September. So that cycle has also passed now. And adjusting now the 202 trading day cycle, we see a possible top in October. So coming up in 3 to 4 weeks from now. So all 3 cycles suggest we are arriving at the topping condition now. Or we can do a composite analysis, and if we do a composite analysis on all those 3 cycles, we will identify that the possible top is here listed at beginning of August. So as I said, the data was from July. We are now approaching their top, or have now passed their top with the September period here. But, and that's the key point I want to make, if you're following our cycle analysis for a longer time, I now want to get back to the nominal 200-day cycle. Some of you for sure will have in mind when we have run the Bitcoin workshop, and if you have followed the work on Bitcoin I'm doing here now for 2 or 3 years on that, you will all be aware of that there's a 200 calendar days cycle in that series. So now let's think for a moment, and I tried to explain that. Here's the 140 trading day cycle. And be careful, if I'm talking about the nominal 200-day cycle, don't use the 202 trading days cycle here on that, because 140 trading days is what in calendar days? So now I give you 2 minutes to answer that question, and please put it in the chat section. We have identified a cycle of 140 trading days. Now, what would be the length of that cycle converted to calendar days? Can you answer that question? Monitoring the live chat section. So, come on. Space credits. Kevin, we are there. Yeah, the calculation is right. Rona, thank you. I need to do it on my own. So, Ron, yes and no. The calculation is right. Yes, Ron, you did it. So thank you anyhow. You made it. You made my day and you saved the stream. Otherwise, I needed to grab a beer. 196 is the conversion of the 130 days cycle to calendar days. And now that's important. So we have again identified the 196 calendar day cycle as the nominal 200 day cycle in this data series. So the same most important cycle which we identified on Bitcoin US dollar, just the US dollar, where the 200 days calendar cycle was always one of the most important ones, we now can identify exactly the same nominal 200 calendar day cycles, which is at this point of time at a length of 196 days. Okay, thank you for that quick challenge. We can do this, by the way, we can do this automatically here for sure in our application. We can switch the analysis, and also instead of no pre-processing, we can switch to calendar days. So by doing that, it will automatically fill in the weekends. And then we get the same length also here. So see, that's not a different cycle here. 196 is now identified here as the main cycle. So here we have our 196 nominal calendar day cycle, which is topping here and rolling over. So that's now the story I want to tell for those who are not as deep in that series. There is a pattern of 5 and 3 in the repetition of that cycle in any parabolic moves, in every parabolic move as we measure Bitcoin versus US dollar. Every parabolic up move in Bitcoin has stopped at the 5th repetition of the nominal 200-day calendar day cycle from the low point or when the winter ended in the past. So, and this calculation that also makes it very interesting now is the previous top was, let's make the screen a little bit larger now for that. So the previous top was here in the year of 2021. Again, this is not the Bitcoin price, but we can see it here similar in the basket. So from here on, that's the previous all-time high. We count 3 repetitions of the cycle until we reach the winter or the end of the low. Just here's 1, 2, 3. And that's exactly when we reach the bottom. From this point in time, just count 5 repetitions of that nominal cycle to come to the final termination of that upswing, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So that's it. Isn't that fascinating? So, I mean, nobody knows if that will repeat moving forward. But I'm so happy that we have now even a broader index. So this is on all 15 currency pairs tracking Bitcoin, which is great for cycle analysis because the broader the data. So this is a global valuation of Bitcoin, not just for the US or the euro or whatever currency you can think about, which is influenced by all these specific country-specific monetary policies. This is a global valuation for a Bitcoin, which for cycle analysis is perfect because it evens out all local policies, monetary policies, which could influence price. And for us as an cycle analysis, as I always tell you, these monetary policies are just noise. This is just noise in the data set. So the Bitcoin basket reduces the noise level from a digital signal processing point of view. So therefore, I really love that data series, because if we can lower the noise level, the better we can identify the cycles, and not just better in terms of detecting those cycles, also better in terms of what is the current length and the current phase of those cycles, which is key if we look at the projection perspective of those cycles. So therefore, and you see me here, right, being very, very positive on that, seeing this data set now, which we, by the way, expected this upswing cycle here since April. So we always have spoken about that expected upswing here, which was anticipated for March, April, bringing us up. I mean, it's not as exponential as in the previous moves, but at least we made a new all-time high also in the Bitcoin basket. Yeah, not just in the index. You see here in the Bitcoin basket, we made a new all-time high here compared to the count of 4. So the count of 5 is now not just one cycle, it is again the repetition of the pattern of 3 and 5 in this cycle series. Yeah, so that's why I'm so closely monitoring that behavior right now. I mean, we can do the individual analysis on its own. So the worst case scenario in terms of a cycle analysis would be here. So we might run into early October. That's the longest cycle, which is visible here. Yeah, so 280 calendar days. But that's not the most prominent if you analyze all past major cycles. We can also shorten now the in-sample analysis. Let's do that next. Let's go full screen. As you know, I started with the full data series. So now let's just start our analysis here at the past major top in 2021. Let's update the analysis. So we are now talking about the in-sample series, about 1,300 days. And we see here what is on top is the 197 with the highest stability. So even if we now shorten the in-sample analysis, not using all the Bitcoin data, now just using the previous past, which I always emphasize is more important if we start to do a projection into the future. But we see clearly here 197 is still the most dominant one in terms of strength. Yeah, so the most strongest cycle, which seems to influence amplitude and price, and the strongest cycle in terms of stability, which means this cycle has a low variation in terms of its length and phase. Yeah, so again, here we have our nominal 200-day cycle. And even if we just use that smaller amount of data to more fine-tune the timing, it still shows the same analysis. And that's also part of the stability score. So this cycle is very stable. It will not change even if you put all data in or just the latest data. It always shows on top of the cycle analysis list. So that's key. I mean, it's not as perfect here in the spectrum on its own, but therefore we know from past analysis that this is a dominant cycle over the whole time series. Second, the stability and the strength gives us more confidence here about that. So the other two ones are already pre-discussed, but here you see, now that's interesting if we have a look at the closer series. So the shorter cycles, which we saw, which was 142 and 164 here in that case, and we can also switch back to trading days. for a second here. So here we have the 140, which is the 200-day nominal cycle, but the other cycles have now been disappeared. So just keep a close look if we add all data. So that's now interesting. So now I will add all data into the cycle analysis. You see at the top we have 200, 140, 164. So it's not as clear from those longer term cycles. The 140 is the nominal 200-day cycle. Don't mix it up with this one here. But now see what happens if I now just shorten the in-sample period on that picture. So let's do that again. Let's start our analysis here. You see that the spectrum clearly looks different, but on top, I mean, there is one longer cycle we can analyze in a second. The 140 stays. You see it? The other ones completely changed. Yeah, so the 160 something, and they just disappeared. So that's a clear indication these are not as stable cycles in the current past of that analysis. However, the 140 is. So again, I can put all data in, all data, refresh. You see here 140 still stays as second dominant cycle. Now again, shorten the time frame again to that period. You see they disappear. 140 stays. Just one longer cycle comes now as a possible alternative, but we need to take care the strength is lower than the 140. The stability is quite the same. So and you see it's out of tune here in that sense. So I would not give it that attention here. So the 140 from the strength is much more important here. And that's the 200-day cycle. So hope you got what I'm saying here is the 200 nominal calendar day cycles is very stable in the Bitcoin basket, projects a current top in the current cycle, and is in its fifth iteration from the previous major low. Okay, so I mean that's the story. I don't have more to tell. That's the story, but it is an important story. And I like the global liquidity Bitcoin basket as an index. As a cycle analysis analyst, we are looking for that kind of data. It smoothes out the randomness from different currencies. So let me have a look at your live chat section, as you already made the challenge in the beginning. So Franz, I think you started here about the impact on Bitcoin ETFs. So, I mean, from the investment community, for sure, they are a game changer in influencing that cycle. I mean, why doubt about that? So at least I don't see any reasoning for now that the cycles should change just because they get more prominence. So maybe they get just more mature and more accessible to even more investors. But I think that should not alter the cycles. But Franz, I mean, it's an important topic. And nobody knows what the root cause mainly is. So even I don't know if there's a root cause for the 200 days nominal cycle. So that's anyhow, we're just detecting what's in the data. I mean, I'm not saying that the data is suggesting that. And I don't want to make more recommendations on that because we are just here to do the cycle analysis on the data series. You need to draw your own conclusions on that. Do you think a currency basket adjusted version of the index would be applied to the gold price as well? I mean, for sure. Using a similar methodology on gold price instead of just looking at the gold price in US dollar or whatever seems to be useful. I mean, what is often done is measuring the S&P or the Dow index in terms of gold instead of US dollar. Yeah, so you can use that pair to analyze the Dow or the S&P measured in gold and not in US dollar. That's a very valid usage anyhow, which could be used. Yes, that's another finding from Michael Howell. If you analyze the raw global liquidity and then have a look at the lag between global liquidity and Bitcoin. But there is not a lag between the Bitcoin basket. So the Bitcoin basket is different than global liquidity. But in terms of global liquidity, there is a lack of that. You're right, what Michael Howell is referring to. Yeah, so I would call it another session, right? So, yeah, thanks. So maybe we will have more time to visit that specific data series and have a more in-depth discussion with CrossBorder Capital and Michael on that data. So otherwise, I'm quite happy about that information, and it confirms the 200 days cycle we already are aware of, which is clearly visible as the most dominant cycle in terms of trading days in the Bitcoin series. And you know, there is also a longer term cycle in global liquidity, which you can now stack up. But I will leave that up to you. I hope I triggered a little bit the interest in that kind of data series and the way how we apply cycle analysis. So that's it for today. Have a nice week. We will meet again next week, Monday, same time, same place.